Hello, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks as well to the organizers from UCLA and my fellow presenters. I'm excited to be participating in this conference. I will share my screen. Let's see. In the late 1970s, a little green book spread throughout the world. Japanese farmer Fukuoka Masanobu's The One Straw Revolution, Shizen no Ho Wara Ippon no Kakume. In its pages, Fukuoka described in twisting and repetitive prose his radical farming practice of natural farming, blending practicable rice planting instructions, Buddhistic philosophical ramblings, and personal memoir. Fukuoka outlined a minimalist farming methodology that he called do nothing, in which he asked, how about not doing this? How about not doing that? Progressively removing human artifice and moving closer to a state of quote unquote true nature. I argue that Fukuoka's writings can be considered documentation of another creative practice, one that was aesthetic, embodied, and artistic, enacted through physically cultivating his farm. But this cultivation was not accomplished alone. Indeed, Fukuoka was the first to note that, quote, crops grow themselves and should not have to be grown, end quote. The paddy and orchard became, for Fukuoka, contact zones in which rice and citrus, humans, insects, frogs, spiders, microbes, and infinite unknowable others' life worlds overlapped, their material existences contingent and an ongoing negotiation and transformation. Fukuoka's farming practice consisted of collaboration with these non-human others, attuning himself aesthetically and instinctually to the more than human world. In what follows, I first describe how Fukuoka arrived at natural farming and his natural philosophy before considering how he developed an approach for growing the two main crops on his farm, rice and citrus. By understanding nature itself in aesthetic and cultural terms, Fukuoka articulated a theory of aesthetic agriculture in which what appears natural becomes indistinguishable from what is natural. Fukuoka was born in 1913 and raised on his family's farm in rural Iyo on the island of Shikoku. In the One Straw Revolution, Fukuoka detailed an early moment of epiphany. While working in plant inspection at the Customs Bureau, he descended into depression, wandering aimlessly each night. He recounted collapsing from exhaustion on a grassy hill and witnessing the dewy morning. A heron takes flight, small birds chirp, the leaves dance, and the ocean glistens in the rising sun. Accompanying this view, his convictions were swept away with the wind. Fukuoka had the insight that, quote, in this world there is nothing at all, and he felt that true nature stood revealed. Fukuoka immediately quit his job to drift around Japan, professing his belief that, quote, everything is meaningless and of no value, that everything returns to nothingness, end quote, and therefore people should pursue non-work and non-usefulness. Faced with the unwillingness of strangers to communicate with him, he returned to his family's farm to put his beliefs into practice. On his farm, Fukuoka developed his system of do-nothing natural farming. Taking a minimalist approach, Fukuoka asked if each action was strictly necessary, systematically reducing the labor required to grow rice, while allowing insects and microbes to return to the soil. Fukuoka presented an agrarian fourfold path: no cultivation, no chemical fertilizer or prepared compost, no weeding by tillage or herbicides, and no dependence on chemicals, all viewed as essential by the agriculture establishment at the time. Instead, Fukuoka planted through direct seeding, used a cover crop of clover, rotated crops between rice and winter grains, mulched with straw from spring and fall harvests, and allowed his fields to drain. Eventually, the role of the farmer became so minimal that he claimed that in caring for a quarter-acre field, 1 or 2 people can do all the work of growing rice and winter grain in a matter of a few days each year. Developing such a practice required a specific aesthetic natural philosophy. Nature for Fukuoka referred to a holistic, cosmic, religious totality, interchangeable with God. From the Buddhist Heart Sutra, where, as he put it, all the important points are made, he quotes, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." Fukuoka associated the empty discrimination of the Heart Sutra with scientific reasoning, false illusions of understanding derived from rational inquiry and dissection. Nature, which he saw as an infinitely complex, contingent, and unknowable whole that transcends being and non-being, can instead only be understood through no mind. And likewise, natural farming requires removing all human artifice. Natural farming attains a unity with nature by doing nothing. However, at the same time, Fukuoka saw physically and materially interacting with one's environs through natural farming an essential, even religious practice. How then can one engage with that which is unknowable? Nature remained unknowable for the farmer, but he nonetheless recognized it visually and aesthetically. Through examples and personal accounts, Fukuoka related how he himself developed such an attunement to nature, practiced by recognizing, mimicking, and reenacting natural forms and processes. In addition to his formative epiphany at sunrise mentioned previously, Fukuoka had a second inspirational moment when he saw healthy rice growing untended in an abandoned field, seeding directly as most plants do. These seedlings sprouted from unhulled seed where farmers had threshed rice the previous year. This sight sparked the realization that the vitality that causes plants to grow lies not in the farmer, but in nature, where plants self-seed and grow of their own accord. Hence the maxim, crops grow themselves and should not have to be grown. The practice of natural farming permits those interventions that perform naturalness. Fukuoka's first attempt at direct seeding, mimicking the rice he saw in the untended field, was, in his words, a total failure. In the process, he realized that rice itself is already unnatural, in that it is a cultivar, a variety of plant produced only in cultivation by humans, whose present form is determined by centuries of selective breeding. Sowing modern improved rice seed by a method that approximates nature is unnatural in itself, since rice materially embodies an ancient and ongoing negotiation with its human farmers. He reconciled the farming of cultivars accordingly, writing that, quote, crops which have evolved over thousands and tens of thousands of years by dwelling together with human beings are not products born entirely from the discriminating knowledge of the farmer and can be thought of as naturally occurring foods. In Watsuji Tetsuro's 1935 Climate and Culture, the philosopher argues that the climate or milieu is a cultural force, not only in the way it shapes human activities, but more radically that milieus themselves are expressions of subjective human existence. Similarly, Fukuoka illustrated diagrams of nature's food mandala to demonstrate how the food nature provides complements the character of each season, or perhaps these foods are the creative expression of nature itself. Both farmer and grain participate in a shared milieu, or contact zone, as Donna Haraway would put it, and both are creative expressions of the milieu. To return to a state of nature together with rice, Fukuoka systematically removed elements of modern farming until his intervention was minimized, a dialogue requiring watching the rice's seasonal response to his actions. It was through recognizing those activities that rice takes untended, its stalks producing mulch and its grains self-seeding, and engaging in a collaborative dialogue with the grain that Fukuoka slowly developed his system of direct seeding, no-tillage rice-barley succession. He similarly viewed insects as collaborators on the farm. He noticed one day that grasshoppers, locusts, and crickets cut holes in grains of rice, while the next morning snails, pillbugs, slugs, and cutworms fed on the stamens, opening the grains for fertilization from neighboring plants. These insects were crossbreeding new strains of rice, and if crossbreeding exists in the more than human world, Fukuoka thought, it may hold the ability to revive ancient strains. Removing human artifice can therefore be accomplished through intervention while reenacting natural processes. When first implementing his natural farming approach on his orange orchard, Fukuoka made a terrible mistake. Ceasing pruning as prescribed by his newfound ideology, he allowed the trees to grow without modification. However, their branches quickly became tangled and 2 acres of trees suffocating beneath their own growth and attacked by insects perished. He came to the conclusion that, quote, this was abandonment, not natural farming, end quote. Once modified, nature requires continued tending. Fukuoka acknowledged the difficulty in grasping the difference between natural and unnatural and set out to do just that. Citrus, as much as rice, presented a conundrum for Fukuoka. It too is a cultivar, even further entangled with human intervention, since it must be grown from grafted clones rather than planted seeds, which generate variable, bitter, and often inedible oranges. Thus, there exists no truly natural form. Fukuoka wrote that what was assumed by agronomists at the time as the natural form was simply the traditionally pruned form of the tree, that best enabled harvesting. To deduce a natural farming methodology for this plant, Fukuoka planted seeds with no intention of harvesting fruits. Instead, he was merely observing the shape of citrus growing of their own accord. This gave Fukuoka an aesthetic, formal understanding of orange trees' natural form, allowing him to prune and modify his trees as long as his practice mimetically returned their appearance to a state closer to his intuition of nature. The ecologist, anthropologist, and philosopher Imanishi Kinji shares an aesthetic understanding of nature. In his 1941 The World of Living Things, he argues, contra Darwin's struggle for existence, that most beings seek out a peaceful way of life within the limitations of their environments. Recognition and lifestyle are the driving forces of Imanishian evolution. Similar beings recognize one another and choose to live together, and their bodies adapt to better suit their desired lifestyles. Inspired by the designs patterning ammonite fossils, Imanishi provocatively inverts first and second nature, arguing that through evolution, species express their artistic creativity. Evolution is rethought as an aesthetic process. Similarly, for Fukuoka, the creative roots of natural farming lie in intuitive aesthetic understanding. His lifestyle, which included living together with citrus and rice, required the ability to recognize the plant's natural forms. With citrus, Fukuoka found a way to train his visual faculties in order to grow the natural form from an unnatural graft. Fukuoka undertook an expanded aesthetic practice outside of traditional art making in the realm of farming. In dialogue with his more than human collaborators, he recognized, mimicked, and reenacted the aesthetics of nature. He painted as rice, spreading seeds directly onto his fields at the precise moment they might have fallen without intervention. He sculpted as citrus, trimming and shaping his trees into a natural form. And he collaborated with insects and microbes, tending to space where these beings could return to their chosen lifeways. In what Imanishi might call his lifestyle, Fukuoka enacted a never-ending performance, wending his way toward the creative practice that is natural farming. Thank you.